Oh man, listen. This is Brandon, and you're watching Pops on Pop Culture, and I have watched Dark Phoenix, and I wish I could tell you great things. I don't have good things to say, but I'm here on my couch. I got to vent to somebody. It might as well be you. Stay tuned. Okay. So listen, obviously if you're a comic book fan, you are very familiar with not only the X-Men, but X-Men Dark Phoenix. So this is a very famous comic book story. And if you've been following any of the X-Men movies now, which started in around 2000, which had an incredible cast, Hugh Jackman become a superstar because of all this, but you have Halle Berry and many other key actors that did great. And obviously the whole Patrick Stewart, Professor X, Ian McKellen as Magneto, and it really built a franchise for Fox. And they kind of took that hiatus, that time off, because X-Men Last Stand, which dealt with the Dark Phoenix story, was just an absolute disaster, right? Brett Ratner just did a terrible job directing from a horrible script, and it was just a mess. So we fast forward and we see Fox trying to reboot this, and they come up with a new story, right? So the first movie is called First Class, deals with the origins of the X-Men, Professor X, Magneto, their friendship coming together, forming this alliance for mutants and that kind of thing. Then you have Days of Future Past, which is clearly a connection, a direct connection to these older films. Hugh Jackman is this huge link, bringing Wolverine into an active role in all of this. Then they did Age of Apocalypse, which was really kind of a letdown. They really had a great opportunity there to do some good things, but it really fell pretty flat as well. Now, so that brings us to Dark Phoenix. Now, a lot of us are even surprised there is a fourth film, but Fox, I think, was kind of desperate, right? So Fox was trying to find their ways. Marvel was itching to get a lot of these products back, and the franchise was really kind of in jeopardy because Age of Apocalypse was just so bad. Like, nobody liked it. Now, I personally don't think Age of Apocalypse is as bad as a lot of other fans do. The problem with the film really is I just don't care, right? The villain is just dumb, and that's just a bad guy going to come destroy the Earth. The motivation's not really there. We don't really know why. It's just a bad guy. And it's only there so that we can now showcase certain mutants' powers. So let's fast forward, right? So Dark Phoenix starts, and it picks up where it left off with Age of Apocalypse. Now, I want to say with Age of Apocalypse, there's this quick moment where you see Jean Grey, Sophie Turner's character, come into her power where she steps out, defeats Apocalypse, and you see this fiery bird-like structure, and that is a phoenix, right? So it alludes to this power and this inner strength that she has, and it ties directly and it foreshadows the story. But the story gets a little weird right from the get-go. So the film starts in the 90s, and there's a NASA flight. The astronauts are involved in an accident involving this mysterious energy force. They're stranded, and the X-Men are called in for a rescue mission, right? So they go in. It's really actually done pretty well. I think Nightcrawler's role in this film was one of the high points in it. Some of this footage is in the trailer, so I'm not spoiling anything with this, and that's that Jean is there, left the ship enough to be exposed to this energy force, but it basically absorbs into her. She basically becomes one with this energy. So then there's another character, Jessica Chastain's character, who's brought into the mix. Basically, she and some others are this alien surviving race where this energy force, this Phoenix Force thing, which is not well defined, is a consumer of planets. It's destroying planets, and their planet was destroyed, and she is leading this uprising to basically control this entity, take over the Earth, restart their race, whatever. It really doesn't matter because we don't really care. It's another faceless villain that could come and go, been replaced. I have no idea why these companies like Fox hired a great actress like Jessica Chastain to play a character that could have been played by nobody. In fact, I actually thought to myself, this is really no different than the leather-clad Terminator in T3, the third Terminator movie. It really was that stoic and that bland, and I cared absolutely less. Just a bad person coming and doing bad things. So the story is designed to do nothing else than showcase some sort of turmoil of inner Jean Grey and the Dark Phoenix entity that basically wants to just kill and obliterate things. We don't really know why it wants to, but it does. And can she control it or not? So it is unleashed because we learn Professor X has controlled her mind in a childhood tragedy, and that somehow the Phoenix coming into her life has broken these barriers, and now she's unhinged. I wish I could tell you that any of this is good. It is got this long, boring middle chapter. The big shock of the film is spoiled in all the trailers. There's been huge fan outrage over that death. I won't spoil it at this point. If you haven't seen it, don't watch any trailers because it'll be ruined for you. And it was promised that that was part of a bigger impact to the X-Men. It was like one death maybe, or one big thing. There's other teasers in the trailers that kind of allude to other things. And you really thought, well, maybe they're going to do something big here. Maybe they're going to really kill off some characters, make a big impact in their universe, and really showcase something for the X-Men going forward. I can tell you right now, none of that happens. I can't rate the film high. I'm going to give this a very lenient 4, probably more like a 3.5, to be perfectly honest. I would actually tell you a low ball number and have you come in pleasantly surprised. I would tell you right now that this is the kind of thing I would recommend for you when it streams for free on Netflix or Prime or Hulu or something like that, and not spend your cash, because you're not getting anything good out of it. Nothing comes, basically there's not a lot that even changed from the beginning of the film to the end of the film, really, other than we lose a character that matters. The other X-Men that kind of come on screen, they leave. It's just a lot of really bad plot points. So I'm not going to spoil a whole lot more for you. If you're expecting much, you're going to be highly disappointed, and 3 is probably going to be high for you. If you are a big fan of like the really thoughtful, good intrigue that was done with First Class, you're going to be incredibly disappointed with this film. It is basically just a reboot of Last Stand, and it's as bad, if not worse. So that's my take on that. Stick around as I go into more spoilers, give you some more insight, more details on X-Men Dark Phoenix. Well, there's your pause. That's your moment. I'm here on my couch talking about this film, and I tell you what, man, I was so incredibly disappointed. I fitted in knowing there was a lot of terrible reviews. The first real buzz on this for me was that the critics were all talking about how boring it was, right? So critic circles are a little strange, right? When you're at a screening, sometimes the critics are all there too, and you're there early, so people will talk about the last one they've seen and that kind of thing. So I didn't go to this screening. This was for Secret Life of Pets 2. I had gone to an earlier screening, and Debbie went for me, and she tells me how these other critics are sitting around just bashing this X-Men movie. Dark Phoenix was so boring, so dull, whatever. So here I am. I want to see it on the screen, because if I'm going to see it, I'm going to get any impact at all. That's what I'm going to do. So I go to do this, and it starts out actually pretty good. Like, so it starts out good with this rescue mission in the NASA shuttle, and they save the astronauts, and Jean has got this Phoenix thing that comes inside of her. Then these alien things show up, and we don't really know much about them. So we're trying to figure out, like, do they have the key to anything relevant? And the reality is, no, they don't. So I'm not sure we know why the Phoenix does what it does. I'm not sure how the aliens think that they're going to control this thing. It destroyed their planet, so I don't know exactly why it is they suddenly now have the ability to control this thing that they didn't have to save their own planet. They don't sound like they have any good motivations either. It's not like they're going to save us from the Phoenix, control it, do anything good with Earth. Earth's just going to be collateral damage at best. So I guess we're going to be controlled by these overlords who know how to control the Dark Phoenix. I don't know. It didn't really make any sense to me. So the story progresses. Jean's getting out of control, right? So it's set up very early in the movie. It's teased. It's literally almost the exact same thing that happens with Shazam, where, you know, someone's going to die and the kid's traumatized, and then they got to somehow deal with this tragedy in their life, right? So instead of having to go over an orphanage, Jean has had her memories sort of like compartmentalized by Professor X. So she's been shielded from this pain and this grief her whole life. So she hasn't dealt with it. So when the Phoenix comes into her, she now can deal with that, right? And then she hears her dad's voice. So suddenly he's alive, and she's got to go run to see him. I don't think it really made a lot of sense. Like, it just was a weird sort of abrupt thing. Like, Professor X and her didn't really have a conversation. Like, I don't understand why Xavier doesn't just say, well, listen, Jean, here's what I did. Here's why I did it. I'm sorry I did it. Your dad is alive, but. So instead, that little plot line is just dramatized. And the guy that directed this is Simon Kinberg, and he, I think, is given a lot more credit than he deserves with the X-Men universe, because it is not a good film, and a lot of these other ones that were not good, he's involved in those too. And he just drug this little plot point out to think it matters, and I'm like, I don't know why it's supposed to matter, right? So Xavier really has this huge negative now on his resume of who he is and his character as a person, and that's supposed to overshadow the good that he's doing. Like, he's become a fame junkie, right? Because now he's the leader of the X-Men, and he talks to the president and all of that, and that didn't really work either. I mean, there's part of me that does, But the part that didn't kept getting worse because every other scene it was about he's drinking and he's drinking and he's drinking. And it was just, okay, this isn't even the Professor Xavier that we all know and love. So then Jean gets her powers. And folks, I'm sorry if I'm dragging on or you're like bored already, because I'm doing the best I can to give you the plot points, because this movie doesn't do a lot of things right, and it's pretty bad. And you just kind of keep going along for the ride because there are these little good moments, and then they're just fleeting again. Nothing happens. So when Jean's breaking out of this and they're at the house and there's this big battle with how Jean's trying to deal with her anger over finding out her dad's really been alive, it's Mystique that's become this leader of the team who now tries to face her and talk her off the ledge. And of course, Jean acts out and Mystique gets killed. So this is teased in the trailer. It's all basically spoiled. Simon and Kinberg and Fox were both called out on this, and they basically promised us all that this would be because this was not just the one thing. That somehow this X-Men film was not afraid to do daring things, was not afraid to do something impactful. So we're all thinking, okay, well, what else could that mean? Well, in the footage, we see a scene where Magneto, facing Jean, his helmet is like crushing in on his face. So most of us are saying, oh man, Magneto's going to bite it, right? And that makes sense. That would be a good thing to see happen. Or he's damaged to a point or injured to a point where now he's not going to be Magneto in the way we know it. Maybe some of the other characters die, especially some of the secondary characters. Nope. None of that happens. Sorry, you're not going to miss anything. It just is drawn out. Mystique dies. Beast is now upset. So, and oh, by the way, let me just say something that Fox does incredibly wrong in this film. And I think it's just part of the battle with Marvel, because I don't know exactly how this works, but from what I understand, Marvel holds the rights to the toys, right? They held all these merchandising rights. I'm not sure what Fox gets in their share, how this works, but part of this deal is Fox is making movies, but Marvel's getting some cash on the side over here. So one thing that happens in the movie I thought was extremely strange, and I only bring the toy thing up only because the only explanation I have is that. Because the characters are never called by their code names, right? So it's Eric, never Magneto. It's Kurt, not Nightcrawler. It just goes on and on and on. No one's ever called by their code names in this film. Like it actually becomes frustrating. Like, I don't understand. It's always Scott, not Cyclops. No, there's not any. I'm not sure in hindsight there's any code names ever used. Now, the exception to that might be in the general public, because there's a lot of fanfare about the X-Men. They basically have become celebrities, so there's probably some references like that. But I'm talking about just them interacting. Things like no one ever uses a code name ever. It's really, really awkward, and it may just be used to kind of, I think, just to humanize them and try to make them seem more down to earth. It's about them as people, not their superhero identity. So it just totally removes the science fiction element of the whole thing by just keeping them focused on just their human parts and not their alternate identities and their powers and that kind of thing. So that's another big miss in all of this. But let me get back that. So as we go through this film and we move through the situation, we find out Magneto has basically been living a life in solitude. He's almost like a 1990s hippie. He's got a little commune going with other mutants. Instead of having the school for the gifted like Xavier had, he has his version. Now, what I thought was really bad or dumb was it's not like clear, like we're not really setting up Genosha, which I could be saying wrong, by the way. It's an island. It's something that makes sense with the comic books, because Simon Kinberg does not care about the comic books. If you've read Dark Phoenix and you think this is going to finally be the telling of the Dark Phoenix saga, this classic comic book story, you will be so incredibly disappointed, because Jessica Chastain's character is not the character that you all think she's going to be based on the comic book story. Wolverine is not in this film, and he's extremely important in the story arc in the comic book, right? So we have a role for Quicksilver. Well, sadly, we get one scene with Quicksilver. It's some of the best parts in the previous movies. It's still fantastic in this movie, and it adds a little bit of humor and lightheartedness, and then the story goes on without him. That's it. Just moves on without him. He's completely irrelevant again. So the film does just very little right. It has some elements of entertainment just from being a big budget Hollywood film. It's superhero stuff, some big fights and things like that. I don't think it's really clear for us to understand what the alien race can do and not do. They seem like they're able to hold their own against Jean, but not really, because she's holding back her powers, and we don't really know what's Phoenix, what's not Phoenix. And then at the end, she just sacrifices herself, and she becomes something. Because at the end of the movie, there's this little moment where it just flies across the sky. That must be Jean looking down on us from space as a firebird. It's that dumb. It really is. So I'm giving it a very lenient 4. And I only say that because I'd rather you be pretty disappointed and like it more than I'm telling you than think that it's good and you get in there and you're like, well, Pops is a crappy, terrible critic and I don't trust him anymore. And I don't want to do that to you people. I want you to know that I'm going to try to do my best to tell you it's good. Look, if you got a kid and they're into some of this stuff, they'll like a few of the scenes, but I got to be honest, you could probably get it at home and fast forward to that, give them like a good 20 minutes of some of the action sequences, and that'll be good enough because it's just a lot to sit through for things not happening. It's just really, really dumb. The entire concept that Magneto and 2 or 3 of the other mutants are going to team up and take down Jean when she's literally just laying waste to everything in her path. It just didn't make any sense. And then to have this big fight scene on this train, all of that, by the way, should have been moved up in the film because it was at the very end of the film. It has a good ending in the sense that all of this moves the story along. It's dumb that that's the final part of the film. Like, we didn't need this big middle. We have this big drawn out boring middle and then this big climactic scene. I think we could have done better if we just gotten rid of some of the middle, tightened up some of the storylines, had this big train thing, had this big climactic part, then set up another battle or something that would have been of substance or would have given us something to wrap all this up. Maybe with the aliens or maybe something that would have made some sense of it. So instead, the beginning of the movie is that the mutants are good. The end of the movie, the mutants are bad. The beginning of the movie is the X-Men are led by Mystique and they have a purpose. And at the end of the movie, they're not led by her. They kind of have a purpose, but now they're kind of in hiding and Jean's gone and we don't really know much about what happens with other people, right? I mean, you know, Eric and Xavier are going to play chess and discuss some things, kind of like alludes to their first movie, but at that point we don't really care. We're kind of waiting for it to end, just like I'm sure the actors are, because we're all happy that Marvel's taking this over because maybe they'll give us something good. That's a story for another time. Thanks for hanging out with Pops.